सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Ever since the Russia-Ukraine war started, there has been a talk about moving away from the dollar as the global reserve currency, mostly because countries like Russia, China, they want to move away from the dollar. And well, Russia, because of the sanctions, has to move away from the dollar. There's also been talk about the rise of India and whether the rupee can become a truly international currency. And that's what we're going to discuss in this episode of Macrosutra. What can India do to make the rupee truly international? I'm Deputy Editor at ThePrint, TCA Sharad Raghavan, and we have with us Radhika Pandey, Associate Professor at NIPFP. Thank you, Radhika, for joining us.
Thank you, Sharad.
So, Radhika, let's start with the most basic question. What is the internationalization of the rupee? What do we mean by that?
Yeah. So internationalization of any currency means that when that currency can be freely used for exports and imports, it can be used for invoicing, settlement and payment of exports, imports, and it can be used in international transactions other than the trade-related transactions.
Right.
Like if a country is freely able to borrow in its own local currency, and if there is a appetite for, say, rupee-denominated bonds abroad, so that is when we say that the currency is international. So
And right now, that's the dollar, right? Mostly it's the dollar.
It is the dollar. So because of various reasons that we can talk about, but internationalization of currency, in principle, it means that whatever, we understand as the functions of money, like money is used as a medium of exchange, money is used as a store of value. So when we extend these functions beyond the boundaries of the country, and we talk in terms of international transaction, then suppose when money currency can be used for international transactions freely, then it is internationalized. Currency is used as a foreign exchange reserve for other countries' central banks. That is called the store of value. When we are maintaining our reserves in dollars, that is again a hallmark of a truly international currency.
Right. If some other country held rupees as their foreign exchange reserve.
Yes. So that is, if Sri Lanka is trading in rupees, that is one step ahead for rupee internationalization. When two countries agree to trade in rupee and make payments for India's exports in rupees, that is again a step forward towards internationalization. So there are various destinations, there are various steps towards internationalization, and the final step in this is if your currency is part of the SDR, the IMF reserve currency, then it can be said that truly it is an international currency. For example, right now in the SDR basket of the IMF, US has the maximum weightage. China was nowhere, but in 2016 it got a place in the IMF SDR basket, and now in 2022 its weightage increased from somewhere around 10.9 to 12.28%. So whereas the weights of other currencies like Japanese yen and pound declined. So it just shows the relative importance of these currencies in international trade and finance. So when we say that there's a growing importance of the currency freely, with lower cost, and there's a trust in that currency, then we say that there is, the currency is truly international.
Right. So now clearly there are several advantages to India if the rupee were to become more international, but there are also some downsides.
Yeah, so downsides will be initial, but let's talk about some of the advantages.
The benefits first,
the benefits, particularly for a country like India, when there will be more trade happening in rupee, or when there is a greater appetite for rupee in capital account transaction, mean that we will be able to borrow in rupees. That means companies will be able to finance their borrowings in rupees. They will be insulated from exchange rate risks,
Right.
because that exchange rate risk will be borne by the investors who are investing in rupee denominated bonds. Government at some point, if it decides to issue sovereign bond in international markets, right now it's a policy decision not to do that. But at some point, if they decide to do, as rupee becomes more international, then it will also help in financing their fiscal deficit at a lower cost.
Yeah.
So these are some of the advantages. And also then, because more and more transactions are being held in rupees, the need to hold a lot of foreign exchange reserves, that need gets lesser. So the cost of holding forex reserves, because right now what is essentially happening, that globally we are all financing the US deficit.
Yes.
We are all countries are holding a greater proportion of UST bills, US Treasury bills. So in that case, we are financing. They are able to have a higher deficit, both on the on budget as well as on their trade account, which is the current account deficit, because of the fact that there is a global demand for dollar, there is a trust in dollar, there is an appetite for dollar in international transactions. So that is the reason that it's able to finance its deficits at a lower cost. So all those advantages will pertain to India also, if these conditions, if the various restrictions that currently are there, which the recently released RBI's report has talked in detail.
Right.
If some of those issues are addressed, there are some structural issues which will take time, but there are some low-hanging fruits that can be addressed, so we can at least make some steady progress towards internationalization.
Right.
But coming to the disadvantage, the disadvantage is only at a initial stage, theoretically, because if suddenly there is a big jump in the demand, for example, if rupee becomes international, if there is a big jump in the demand for rupee, which runs counter to the monetary policy objectives, because RBI would not like to print so much rupees, but then it runs counter because there is excess demand globally. So that could lead to volatility. But in all fairness, it's the advantages that outweigh the costs of internationalization.
Right. So now you mentioned the RBI report, and it has, I understand, made some recommendations how India can make the rupee more international. So what are some of these recommendations? And also, do they include like, say, this recent deal that we did where UPI can be used in UAE?
Yes.
Are those some of the measures?
Yes. So it's a very comprehensive and timely report, because as you mentioned in the introduction, due to the sanction, there is a growing search for non-dollar currency which can fit the bill, which can be trustworthy, which can play the role of an international currency.
Right.
China is trying hard to make renminbi the international currency. It has been able to do, as is seen from the its weight in the SDR basket. But the problem is there is lack of trust. So there is a scalability problem because of lack of trust. But coming to the recommendations of the report, they first give an overview of the current situation, and then they present some recommendations on how to make the rupee international, which is basically the same what we talked about in the what are the definition.
Right.
So it's talking about having a framework for rupees settlement, trade settlement in rupees. So there has to be some standardized approach. It should not be a haphazard thing. There has to be some template on how we decide to, whenever there is a demand from some country for rupee trade, for settlement of trade in rupees, how do we go about it? What are the steps?
Right.
What are the templates? How do we deal with those countries with whom we have a trade deficit and with whom we have a trade surplus? We need to have a different policy response. So that is one major recommendation. Though there are issues, we can talk about what happened in with the rupee trade with Russia, where Russia, because India has a trade deficit with Russia, and that deficit has widened, particularly after the surge of oil import. So what is happening is that India is paying Russia in rupees, but Russia doesn't know what what to do with those rupees, because Russia is not importing so much from India. So beyond the point, they expressed their discomfort with holding rupees. And at the same time, Russia's imports from China were rising, so they want to have more of yuan.
Yes.
So they asked India to make payments in yuan.
Right.
So those are some of the impediments, but with some other countries like Sri Lanka, Nepal, at least the report talks about, making rupee part of the currency settlement, at least in some of these currencies in these countries, and also in the Asian Currency Union, which is one of the settlement mechanism for Asian countries. So that is one. The other set of recommendations deal with capital control, because this is current account, capital account, because if a country is holding surplus rupees, they should have an avenue for investing those rupees in Indian assets.
Of course.
So that will require what? That will require easing of capital control. That will require easing of restriction. They should be allowed to do FDI with that surplus rupees. They should be allowed to invest in government bonds or corporate bonds or external commercial borrowing, or open a rupee deposit with Indian banks. So all those are the other set of recommendations that the committee talks about.
In fact, when I had been reporting on the fact that India is using rupees now to pay for Russian oil, at the time, a lot of the experts I'd spoken to who were saying that, Russia needs something to do with these rupees. They were saying that one easy way to fix this problem could be that Russia invests in factories over here, which can then export goods back to Russia. Exactly. So there's a cycle.
Yeah. So those are that is something which is talked in detail in the RBI report, that there have to be a suite of avenues for the countries who are holding a surplus pile of rupee to invest in Indian assets, and which require a set of liberalization, capital account liberalization, re-looking at the various restrictions that permit a non-resident from opening a rupee account with Indian banks and so on. Another last set of recommendation is on Masala Bonds, which is a very important foundational element of rupee internationalization, which is, rupee denominated bond. So when companies are raising finance from outside through the issue of rupee denominated bond, it is called Masala Bonds. In China, it is dim sum, and various terminologies are used. So now that is if Masala Bonds gain more traction, if they gain more volume, that is again a symbol of rupee internationalization.
Of course.
Because there is a greater appetite for rupee bonds. So what needs to be done, what the committee advocates correctly, is that the withholding tax, currently there is a withholding tax of 5% that should be withdrawn. So that will really help in enhancing the attractiveness of Masala Bond. But in addition, I feel that we also need to, provide the foreign investors with adequate hedging instruments. Okay, so right now, because now if they are dealing with the foreign exchange risk, now,
so you have to compensate them or hedge their risk in some way.
Yes, so there should be proper mechanisms for hedging, also for credit risk if Indian company defaults on its bond. So there needs to be a suite of financial instruments to address credit risk, hedging, and have more liquid such instruments which are deep and liquid to improve the attractiveness of Masala Bonds. So these are, in short, some of the recommendations. It's talked about a lot, as you mentioned, about the payments, the UPI, saying that UPI can be used, can be leveraged to improve rupee internationalization. Given the context that India is one of the major recipients of remittances. So India, Singapore have already entered into an agreement. India, UAE have entered into an agreement. There are other set of some 11, 12 countries that have shown interest in UPI. So this is an area where we already have a natural advantage, and so we should capitalize on that and showcase the importance, attractiveness of UPI, so that more and more people use that for remittance that will help in lowering costs.
So now I have two questions which I don't know if we have the answers to, because it's for the government to decide. But one is, has the government indicated anything, or the RBI indicated anything about whether they're going to take the recommendations of this committee? That's one. And two, has the committee itself recommended anything on the sovereign rupee denominated bonds, which the government had earlier decided it would not go ahead with?
Yeah, so as of now, both the RBI and the government are silent on the report's recommendations per se. But separately, if you see a lot of, the current RBI governors, deputy governors, and even previous ones, they have spoken about the fact that rupee internationalization is a desirable public policy objective.
Right.
Where the difference lies in the fact that they say that rupee internationalization can be achieved without full capital account convertibility. So that is something which is a debatable issue, that whether you can achieve rupee internationalization without easing your capital control, particularly because in India our share in global exports is only 2%.
Yes.
So there could be two routes. China has managed to do with capital control, but because it has a trade surplus with most of the countries. So there is an appetite for other trading partners to hold yuan because China is exporting. So they would want to hold yuan. But for India, that is a problem because we have surplus with some countries, but on an aggregate basis, we run a persistent current account deficit, and we have a trade deficit with a large number of countries. Our share is very small in the global exports. It's only 2%. So unless we increase our footprint in the global export market, we cannot hope to achieve rupee internationalization by that route.
And one way to do this is to ease your capital control.
Absolutely. One way to do it. And we have already been doing that. It's just that we need to relook, and we need to plug some of the loopholes which this committee has talked about.
Right. So now one of the questions that we have from the audience, it refers to the dominance of the dollar, and how the US has a lot of advantages because of this and doesn't want any dilution in this. So the question they're asking is, what are some of these advantages that the US has got because the dollar is so dominant? I think we addressed one of them, which is that their deficit is being financed by all of us.
Yeah, so there's a very interesting term used here, which is called exorbitant privilege.
Right.
US enjoys exorbitant privilege. This term was coined by the French finance minister way back in 1960.
Wow.
So it is in this context only that US is able to finance its deficit at a relatively lower cost.
Right.
Though some of the US economists are now saying that that advantage is getting eroded because of the declining share of US in trade, also because of the declining share of US in foreign exchange reserves. So there is a very important database called COFR, which tells us about the share of foreign exchange reserves of various currencies in all countries' foreign exchange reserves.
Right.
So it shows that dollar's share has come down from somewhere around 64 to 58%, which is still quite an enormous share. Almost 60% of forex reserves are held in dollars, but there has been a slide.
That's still quite a drop.
Yeah, it is, and it has happened over the last 3 years. But the interesting thing to note is that this share has not been captured by its competitors. It's not been captured by, say, euro or yen or China. It's the other small currencies which have captured. So the point that they can scale up is limited. So still that dollar dominance is going to stay at least for the short to medium term.
If I remember right, some of the Southeast Asian currencies, right?
Some of the Southeast Asian currencies have taken some of this decline in share of the US dollar. So that is one. And the other is because US dollar has so much prominence in international trade and payments, it can use its dollar supremacy for diplomacy, that it can impose sanctions. That is because the trade in dollars takes place through US correspondent banks. So it can instruct the US correspondent banks to freeze the US assets, which is what happened in Russia. So these two are very big advantages that US can enjoy, a high current account deficit and a high fiscal deficit by virtue of the fact that its US Treasury bill market is the most deep and liquid market.
Yeah, absolutely.
So everybody demands it and wants to hold their reserves in the form of US Treasury bills, which gives them the advantage of financing their deficit at a lower cost.
Right. And now the next question from the audience is that which would be more beneficial, making the rupee more international or making technology like the UPI more international? But I think they go hand in hand, right?
They go hand in hand, and making UPI more international is one of the major steps towards rupee internationalization.
Right.
There are various steps in this journey towards not one event. It involves a lot of things. It involves allowing local currency trade, which we've talked about, invoicing settlement in rupees. It involves easing of capital account transaction. It involves making our payment system more acceptable and usable by other countries and also for remittances.
Right.
It also involves making the Indian sovereign bonds a part of global bond indices, which again is something which has been talked about, but government doesn't seem to be more inclined to this at this point in time. So,
Right.
and then finally, rupee becoming part of the SDR, the special drawing rights. So there are various steps in this journey. Withholding tax has to be eliminated. The entire foreign investment regime, investments in debt, has to be rationalized, because that is something which the committee also talks about. We have various routes for foreign investment in debt, but that has made the system very complex. So it has talked about making it rational, simplified. So these are some of the things that we can do, but definitely making UPI more international is one very important step in making the rupee international.
Right, absolutely. And now our final question from the audience is that we've already, I think, addressed this, but it's about whether, like, which countries are going to be more accepting of the rupee. We can very happily say that we want the rupee to become more international, but countries need to be accepting of the rupee. So is it going to be only the ones where we make a lot of payments to, where we import a lot from, so we make a lot of payments to them, so we try to convince them, take the rupee and we'll give you some advantages to that? Or do you think, like, even countries like, say, the US or EU or the UK, they will also start accepting the rupee?
So we've already seen one example where Russia was not comfortable in holding rupees, but on the other hand, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bangladesh, these countries are, in fact, they came ahead and said that they want to hold rupee as one of the foreign exchange, as part of their foreign exchange reserve, because they are facing acute dollar shortage. So that is also one of the reasons why, for them, rupee is acting as a credible replacement to dollar, but that may not be the case with countries with which we have a trade deficit. So as the committee, the RBI report mentioned, we need to follow a two-pronged approach. One for countries with which we have a trade deficit, one with whom we have a trade surplus. With countries with whom we have a trade deficit, and they are holding more piles of rupees, we have to give them adequate avenues for attractive avenues
using that rupee.
So that is important. And with whom we have a trade surplus, we need to have some kind of swap arrangements, which China has used extensively to improve its share in international trade. Swap means the two central banks exchange their currencies at an exchange rate. So if a country has a shortage of rupee but it wants to pay in rupees, then the central banks of the two countries can enter into an agreement to exchange their respective currencies. So that swap arrangement has worked very well for China, and it has helped in improving its share in international trade, because it has entered into swap agreements with a lot of smaller countries, also with countries which do not have much of foreign exchange reserves. So there needs to be two-pronged approach for the two countries, for two set of countries, to ensure that we move ahead in rupee internationalization. But again, the thing to remember is that our share in global exports is 2%.
So
that needs to improve. India needs to become a large economy from the perspective of international trade and finance. Then we can truly say that we can become international. But
Right.
in that journey, we need to fix all these loopholes.
Right. So there you go. I mean, in a nutshell, rupee becoming more international is a good thing for us, but it's a long way away, because just in terms of global exports and the size of our economy, we aren't quite there yet. There are several policy changes that we can make, and these need to be calibrated changes. These can't be a one-size-fits-all policy change. We need to look at which countries we have a trade surplus with, which countries we run a deficit with, and we need to figure out how best to incentivize them to use the rupee. And that's the only way that we can make the rupee truly international. That's all we have for you in this episode of Macrosutra. But before you go, I have an appeal to make before you, which is please do subscribe to ThePrint. It's through your subscriptions that we can do all of the good work that we're doing. One example I want to tell you about is this recent horrific video that came out of Manipur. That story was reported by our reporter on the ground, Sonal Matharu. She reported on it a week ago, and these kind of stories are made possible because of your contributions. We can have discussions like this because of your contributions. But apart from that, subscribing to ThePrint also gets you some benefits which allow you to, read the newsletters that our editors write. They come directly to your mailbox. We analyze the news. We put forth what we think are important for you to read. Then you get priority passes to the exclusive webinars that we do with experts. They also come and analyze the news of the day, talk about, what you need to understand in the news of the day. And finally, in our Your Turn section, you can write into us and we'll publish your opinion as an article. So please do subscribe to ThePrint. The link is in the description of this video. And thank you so much for watching.